1950. Juliet came up from the underground and made her way along Great Portland Street. Broadcasting House hove into view. Juliet was a producer in schools, and as she approached Portland Place, she found her spirits drooping at the prospect of the tedious day ahead. A departmental meeting with Prendergast, followed by a recording of Past Lives, a series she was looking after. It was almost lunchtime when Prendergast's meeting stuttered to an inconclusive halt. It was still only early March, but there had been a bright pinch of spring in the air, and she had thought it would make a change to eat al fresco. It was just as she was passing the top of Berners Street that she saw him. "Mr. Toby! Mr. Toby!" Juliet picked up her pace and reached him as he was about to round the corner into Cleveland Street. She plucked at his coat sleeve. He turned round, seemingly unsurprised, so she was sure that he must have heard her shouting his name. He looked steadily at her. "Mr. Toby, it's Juliet. Remember me?" Pedestrians flowed awkwardly around them. "Juliet Armstrong." He tipped his hat, a grey trilby that she thought she recognised. He offered a faint smile and said, "I'm sorry, Miss Armstrong. I think you have confused me with someone else. Good day to you." He turned on his heel and began to walk away. It was him. She knew it was him. The same somewhat portly figure, the bland, owlish face, the tortoiseshell spectacles, the old trilby, and, finally, the irrefutable and rather unnerving evidence of the silver-topped cane. She said his real name. "John Hazeldine." She had never once called him that. It sounded like an accusation to her ears. He paused in his stride, but after a beat, he simply walked on. It was him. Why would he pretend otherwise? Juliet never thought of him as John Hazeldine, for he had inhabited the rather dull-seeming domain of Godfrey Toby so thoroughly, so magnificently. To his face he had been Mr. Toby, but really Godfrey was how everyone used to refer to him. It indicated neither familiarity nor intimacy. It was simply a habit that had formed. They had called their operation the Godfrey case, and there were a number of files in the registry that had been headed simply Godfrey, and not all of them were successfully cross-referenced. There had been talk of moving him abroad after the war ended, to protect him in case of reprisals. But wasn't retribution, one way or another, something they were all at risk of? And his informants, the fifth columnists, what of them? There had been a plan to monitor them in peacetime, but Juliet wasn't sure if it had ever been implemented. They never knew that they had been recorded by microphones embedded in the plaster of the walls of the flat in Dolphin Square, to which they came so eagerly every week. Nor did they have any idea that Godfrey Toby worked for MI5 and was not the Gestapo agent to whom they thought they were bringing traitorous information. And they would have been very surprised to know that the following day a girl sat at a big imperial typewriter in the flat next door and transcribed those traitorous conversations, one top copy and 2 carbons at a time. And that girl, for her sins, had been Juliet. Where had he been since the end of the war? Why had he returned? And, most puzzling of all, why would he pretend not to recognize her? I know him, Juliet thought. They had worked together throughout the war. She had been in his home, for heaven's sake, in Finchley, where he had lived in a house with a solid oak front door and a robust brass door-knocker in the shape of a lion's head. "Can I get you a cup of tea, Miss Armstrong? Would that help? We've had rather a shock." And together they had committed a hideous act. the kind of thing that binds you to someone forever, whether you like it or not. Was that why he had denied her now? 2 sugars, that's right, isn't it, Miss Armstrong? Or was that why he had come back? I should have followed him, she thought. But he would have lost her. He had been rather good at evasion. 1940. Godfrey Toby is his name, Peregrine Gibbons said. He poses as an agent of the German government, but of course he is one of us. It was the first time Juliet had heard the name Godfrey Toby, and she said, "He's not actually German, then?" "Goodness, no. There is no one more English than Godfrey." But surely, Juliet thought, Peregrine Gibbons, the name alone, was the apotheosis of an Englishman. "No one more trustworthy either," Peregrine said. "Godfrey's been in deep cover for a long time, attending fascist meetings and so on throughout the 30s. He is well known to the 5th column. They feel quite safe with him. I presume you are familiar with the ins and outs of the 5th column, Miss Armstrong?"
"Fascist sympathizers, supporters of the enemy, sir."
"Exactly. Subversives. The Nordic League, the Link, the Right Club, the Imperial Fascist League, and 100 smaller factions. The people who meet with Godfrey are mostly old British Union of Fascists members, Mosley's lot. Our own homegrown evil, I'm sorry to say. And instead of rooting them out, the plan is to let them flourish, but within a walled garden from which they cannot escape and spread their evil seed." She had been singled out, chosen. "The work we're doing requires a special kind of person, Miss Armstrong," he told her. Peregrine Gibbons, do call me Perry, had a way of speaking to you that made you feel you must be a cut above everyone else, the elite of the herd. He was attractive, perhaps not leading man material, more of a character actor, she thought. And now here they were in Pimlico, in Dolphin Square, so that he could show her the setup. He had taken 2 flats next door to each other. "Isolation is the best form of secrecy," he said. He would live and work in one flat. Juliet would work there too, while in the next-door flat an MI5 officer, Godfrey Toby, would masquerade as a Nazi agent and encourage people with pro-fascist sympathies to report to him. "If they're telling Godfrey their secrets," Perry said, "then they are not telling the Germans. Godfrey will be a conduit to divert their treachery into our own reservoir." Metaphor really wasn't his forte. Perry was already lodged in the Dolphin Square flat. The living room had been turned into an office. The only adornment to Perry's desk was a small, heavy bust of Beethoven, who glared furiously at Juliet when she sat at her own desk, a piece of furniture that in comparison to Perry's was little more than a rather dejected-looking table.
"Do you like Beethoven, sir?"
she asked. "Not particularly," he said. It had seemed like an attractive prospect. She had been working in a prison for the last couple of months. MI5 had relocated to Wormwood Scrubs so as best to accommodate their burgeoning ranks necessitated by war. The cells functioned as their offices, and people were forever getting locked in by accident. Pimlico had seemed an attractive proposition in comparison. And yet, all this talk of isolation and secrecy, was she to be locked away here too? She wondered if she might not have been better off staying in the registry after all. Not that she had been given much choice in the matter. Choice, it seemed, was one of the first casualties of war. Juliet hadn't applied to the security services. She had wanted to join one of the women's armed forces, not particularly from patriotism, but because she was worn out with fending for herself in the months after her mother's death. But then, after war was declared, she had been summoned to an interview. Juliet hadn't really caught the name of the man, Morton, who was interviewing her. He was leaning back in his chair rather nonchalantly, as if he was waiting to be entertained by her. He didn't usually conduct the interviews, he said, but Miss Dicker was indisposed. Juliet had no idea who Miss Dicker was. He had the air of an aesthete, and was thin, elongated almost, a heron or a stork. He seemed amused by everything she said. Everything he said himself, too. "So, you're 18. He made it sound like an accusation.
I am.
"Quite advanced for your age, aren't you?" Was he insulting her?
No, not at all, she answered robustly. I am completely average for my age.
He laughed, a genuine bark of mirth. "Good speeds?"
I'm sorry?
"Speeds, typing and so on."
Oh, speeds, she said. Yes, I have certificates.
She didn't elaborate. He made her feel mulishly uncooperative. Not the best attitude in a candidate in an interview, she supposed, but she hadn't wanted a clerical job. "Anything else you want to tell me about yourself?"
No, not really, sir.
He looked disappointed. And then, in an off-hand manner, he may as well have been asking her if she preferred bread to potatoes, or red rather than green. He said, "If you had to choose, which would you be, a communist or a fascist?"
It's not much of a choice, is it, sir?
"You have to choose. There's a gun to your head."
I could choose to be shot.
Who was holding the gun, she wondered. "No, you couldn't. You have to choose one or the other." Communism, it seemed to Juliet, was a kinder doctrine.
Fascism, she bluffed.
He laughed. He was trying to extract something from her, but she wasn't sure what. Merton took her by surprise, standing up suddenly and walking round his desk towards her. Juliet stood up too. For a wild moment, she thought he was going to try to kiss her. He put out his hand, and she realized that he was waiting for her to shake it. Did she have the job? "Of course," he said. "You had the job before you walked in the door, Miss Armstrong. I just needed to ask the right questions, to be reassured that you are honourable and upright, and so on." But I don't want the job, she thought.
I was thinking of joining the ATS,
she said boldly. He laughed, the way you might laugh at a child, and said, "You will do more good for the war working with us, Miss Armstrong." Later she learnt that Miles Merton, for that was his entire name, knew everything about her, more than she knew herself, including every lie and half-truth she told him at the interview. It didn't seem to matter. In fact, she suspected that it helped in some way. Juliet received a telegram with confirmation of the post, the wording still mysteriously vague, and instructions to wait at the bus stop opposite the Natural History Museum at 9 a.m. the following day. After 20 minutes of waiting in an unforgiving wind, a Bedford bus pulled up in front of Juliet. The driver opened the door and shouted over to her, "MI5, love, hop in." So much for secrecy, she thought. The bus proceeded to stop several times to pick up more people. A couple of youngish men in bowler hats, but mostly girls. "Debs, rotten, the lot of them," the girl in the seat next to her said. She was a swan, pale and elegant.
"Do you want a fag? My name's Clarissa, by the way."
"Juliet."
"Oh, bad luck. I bet everyone's always asking you where Romeo is."
The coach disgorged the rather bewildered group outside the main gates of a prison. "Wormwood Scrubs," Juliet puzzled to Clarissa. "We're to work here." And that was how Juliet's career in espionage began. She was siphoned off into the registry, a place seething with discontent. It had been something of a relief when Perry Gibbons approached her while she was eating lunch in the canteen with Clarissa. She suddenly found him smiling down at her. "Miss Armstrong, don't get up. My name's Perry Gibbons. I need a girl, I'm afraid."
"Well," Juliet said, adopting a note of caution, "I am a girl, I suppose."
"Good. Then can you come to my office after lunch?"
"Who was that?" Juliet asked.
"The famous Peregrine Gibbons. He's running B5B. Counter-subversion."
Clarissa laughed.
"I think you've been plucked."
"And here is the hidden magic," Perry Gibbons said now, opening a door in the Dolphin Square flat to reveal not enchantment, but another, smaller bedroom containing an array of recording equipment and two men who were currently clambering over each other in the confined space in order to install it. To be more accurate, a man and a boy. The man, Reginald Applethwaite, was from the GPO research station at Dollis Hill. The boy, Cyril Forbes, was a junior engineer who worked there too. It was Cyril who would be operating the equipment whenever a meeting of the fifth column was held next door. "RCA Victor, model MI 12700, Reg said proudly. "As used at Trent Park," Perry Gibbons added. "The interrogation centre," he said, when Juliet looked blank. "Merton works there sometimes, I think. He recruited you, didn't he?"
"Mr. Merton? Yes, he did."
She hadn't seen Miles Merton since he had interviewed her. The walls were soundproofed, Perry explained as he led her next door. It was the mirror image of the flat they had just left, as if they had gone through the looking-glass. "The microphones are in the walls," Reg explained. Perry Gibbons had a lovely smile. He should smile more often, Juliet thought.
"He's considered a bit of a renegade within the service," Clarissa told her that evening over drinks at the 400 Club. "I've been mugging up on Perry Gibbons on your behalf. He read classics at Cambridge."
"Who didn't?" Hartley grunted.
"Do shut up, Hartley," Clarissa said.
Hartley had barged his way into their company, bulldozing his way through the crowds towards their table. He had sat down and promptly ordered 2 rounds of cocktails for them.
"He likes to play the buffoon," Clarissa had said. "But he's acute, really. He has an entree into society, of course. His father's in the cabinet."
Oh, that Hartley, Juliet thought. He had come to MI5 via Eton, Cambridge, and the BBC. A well-trodden path. "Well, chin-chin," Hartley said, downing his drink in one. "Gibbons is a queer fish."
"Well, good luck with him anyway," Clarissa said to Juliet. "The girls in the scrubs think he has SA."
SA?
"Sex appeal," Hartley snorted. Sex was a subject that was still largely a mystery to Juliet. Her éducation sexuelle was woefully riddled with lacunae. "And Gibbons has got no small talk whatsoever," Hartley said. "It makes people suspicious of him. The service runs on small talk. No wonder he's isolated himself in Dolphin Square."
"Is your agent going to live here, then?" Juliet asked.
"Godfrey? Good Lord, no," Perry said. "The whole operation hinges on him, you know." They returned to their flat next door. There was a modest knock, and Perry Gibbons said, "Ah, right on time. You can set your watch, by Godfrey." Juliet was expecting someone strapping, a kind of bulldog Drummond, so she was rather disappointed that in the flesh he cut an unassuming, pooterish figure. He was carrying a cane, walnut, topped with a silver knob, an accoutrement that in the hand of another man might have looked rather affected, but he made it seem quite natural. Godfrey was introduced to Reg and Cyril, and Juliet, last of all. "So you're working with old Toby, Jug, are you?" Hartley said. They had encountered him again in the Café de Paris. He was proving relentlessly unavoidable.
"Who?" Clarissa asked.
"Godfrey Toby," Juliet said.
"Do you know him?"
"No, I don't think so. My mother always said not to trust a man with 2 Christian names."
"Godfrey Toby is a master of obfuscation," Hartley said. "It's easy to get lost in his fog. Shall we order another round?"
Our neighbours was what Cyril called the informants, and soon the name stuck. It was a handy shorthand for the cavalcade of people who had been coming for nearly a month now to the Dolphin Square flat, with their talk of potential sympathizers, of RAF camps being built, of the location of army recruitment centres. The main characters in this cast of perfidy were Dolly, Betty, Victor, Walter, Trude, and Edith. Each reported on a myriad others, filaments in an evangelistic web of treachery that stretched across the country. Godfrey's informants were given expenses. Trude, however, was paid. She was a rather peevish and controlling Norwegian, naturalised here for many years now, and was particularly busy recruiting and truffling out Nazi sympathizers. Edith was in her 50s and worked in a dress shop in Brighton, patrolling the English Channel during her daily cliff-top walks. Walter was a naturalised German who worked in the offices of the Great Western Railway and knew a great deal about tracks and trains and timetables. Victor was a machinist in an aircraft factory. Dolly was an unwilling spinster who worked in a large laundry in Peckham, dealing with military uniforms. Dolly often brought her dog to these meetings, a yappy thing that had the knack of barking at crucial moments, making the informant's conversations even more inaudible. The dog was called Dib. Perry had invited her to accompany him to a drinks party at the Admiralty. "Colleagues," he said, "but women will be there, wives mostly." It proved to be quite a sedate affair, and Juliet had the impression that she was being exhibited like an accessory, or perhaps a curiosity. "You're a sly old dog," she heard a man murmur in Perry's ear. "You have a bit of fluff after all, Gibbons. Who would have thought it?" Perry seemed intent on her learning who everyone was. "That's Alleyne, over there by the window. Oliver Alleyne. He's one of us. He's rather ambitious." He said this last regretfully. Perry was not someone who lauded ambition. "And that's Liddell, of course," he continued, "huddled with your friend Merton." "Hardly my friend," Juliet protested. Miles Merton was staring at her in an unnerving manner, but didn't acknowledge her, and she turned away from his gaze. "A somewhat Machiavellian character," Perry murmured. "I wouldn't trust him if I were you." "I am too lowly for him to notice." "The lowlier the better for Merton." When she looked again, Merton had disappeared. As well as transcribing his conversations with the neighbours, Juliet also typed up Godfrey's own records of the meetings, which were rather masterly précis. The informants rambled on tirelessly with their fragmentary thoughts and ideas, and Godfrey absorbed it all like a patient sponge. They incriminated themselves at every turn, while he said almost nothing. Juliet hammered her way to the end of the final record. On leaving the flat, Juliet came across Godfrey Toby standing indecisively in the corridor. The key to his flat was in his hand, but he was gazing absently at the front door as if lost in thought. "Good evening, Mr. Toby."
"Ah, Miss Armstrong, good evening. You and I seem destined to be ships that always pass in the night. Shall I walk you to the lift?"
"That's really not necessary, Mr. Toby."
Too late. He was already steering her down the corridor.
He pressed the button to summon the lift. "Do you have plans for this evening, Miss Armstrong?"
"I'm going dancing with a friend."
Godfrey removed his tortoiseshell spectacles and began polishing them with a handkerchief. "You are young," he said, smiling wanly at her. "You will not feel it as much. As you grow older, I am 50, you begin to despair of the wicked foolishness of the world. It is a bottomless pit, I fear." Juliet wasn't sure what this had to do with dancing. The war still seemed like a matter of inconvenience rather than a threat. The lift doors opened, revealing a woman and a dog. The woman's eyes roamed nervously from Juliet to Godfrey. The dog started to bark, a sound that Juliet knew only too well. Dib, she thought. Dib and Dolly. It was the first time that Juliet had put a face to any of them, including Dib, who, it turned out, was a poodle, rather moth-eaten. Dolly glared distrustfully at Juliet. She gave off a sour, dissatisfied aura, but Godfrey said, "Dolly," as if she were a long-awaited guest at a party. "You're early. Come along. I was just saying to this young lady that this lift has a mind of its own." He was good, Juliet thought. Dolly stepped out of the lift, giving Juliet a dirty look. Juliet replaced her in the lift. "Miss," Godfrey said, tipping his hat again.
"Armstrong,"
Juliet supplied helpfully.
"Miss Armstrong. Have a pleasant evening."
Before the lift doors closed, she heard Dolly say suspiciously to Godfrey, "Who was that?" And Godfrey's offhand reply, "Oh, just one of the neighbours. No one to worry about." Perry Gibbons took Juliet to the Bon Viveur in Shepherd Market for dinner. She had never been to an expensive restaurant. Perry raised his glass and, smiling, said, "To victory." He gazed intently into her eyes and said, "We understand each other, don't we, Miss Armstrong?"
"Yes,"
she said, although she didn't understand him in the slightest. "I've come to the conclusion that perhaps you are ready." She was to be a spy. Her nom de guerre was to be Iris Carter Jenkins. Her main task, he explained when they were back in Dolphin Square, was to try to infiltrate the Right Club. "These people are a cut above our Bettys and Dollys," he said. "The Right Club is drawn from the establishment, a membership peppered with the names of the great and the good. There's a book, supposedly, the Red Book, that lists them all. We would very much like to get our hands on it. As an extra lure for them, you, in the shape of Iris Carter Jenkins, work in the War Office. Something clerical, you know the kind of thing."
"So I'm to find out what they're up to?"
"In a nutshell, I already have agents in place, but I particularly want you to get close to a Mrs. Scaife. She's near the top of the heap. You will have an official existence, identity card, ration book, and so on, all in Iris's name. If anyone were to, say, rifle through your handbag, they would have no idea you were not her. It's best to have a separate handbag when you are Iris, in case anyone is suspicious of you and they take a look." He opened a drawer in his desk and took out a gun. "A Mauser 6.35 millimeter, he said. "Keep it in your handbag. Only use it as a last resort, of course."
"A gun,"
she said. "Just a small one."
"You see, Iris, dear," Mrs. Scaife said, "the power behind world revolution is international Jewry.
Jews have instigated widespread social upheaval since the Middle Ages, haven't they, Mrs. Ambrose?
They have,
Mrs. Ambrose agreed complacently. Mrs. Ambrose's real name was Florence Eckersley. Perry had been running her for years. Mrs. Scaife's husband was a retired rear admiral, as well as a leading light of the Right Club. He was currently languishing in prison along with his Nazi-sympathizing cohorts. Mrs. Scaife had taken over her husband's interests. As far as Mrs. Scaife knew, Iris was a friend of Mrs. Ambrose's niece and was having doubts about our attitude towards Germany. "It's all part and parcel of one and the same plan," Mrs. Scaife explained assiduously to Juliet. "The plan is secretly operated and controlled by world Jewry, exactly on the lines laid down by the protocols of the Elders of Zion. Do you have a copy, dear?"
I don't,
Juliet said. "Let me find you one," Mrs. Scaife said, ringing a little bell on the tea tray. "Dodds, fetch Miss Carter Jenkins a copy of the book. You know the one." Dodds did, apparently. "I wish to save Britain," Mrs. Scaife declared, adopting a rather heroic pose over the teacups, "from the Jews and the Communists and the Masons. The scum of the earth," she added pleasantly, "Judeo-Bolshevism, that is the enemy." The maid returned, clutching the protocols of the Elders of Zion, before handing it mutely to Juliet with a little bobbed curtsy. She scampered away. "Dodds is an utterly hopeless girl," Mrs. Scaife sighed.
Iris works in the War Office, you know,
Mrs. Ambrose said. "Oh," Mrs. Scaife said thoughtfully. "I expect you see all kinds of things."
Thank you so much, Mrs. Scaife, Juliet said,
tucking the protocols into her handbag.
"It was so kind of you to invite me, and so interesting. I would love to talk more."
"It's been a pleasure, Iris dear. You must come again." Dodds, the timorous maid, saw them out.
"Well, it seems you passed,"
Mrs. Ambrose whispered delightedly as they made their way back down the stairs. Juliet breathed deeply. It was a great relief to get away from the stifling atmosphere of Mrs. Scaife's house. A thuggish-looking man was loitering on the street corner, and Juliet supposed he was one of Mrs. Scaife's guards. But then, for all she knew, he could have been one of Perry's men. Whoever he was, she could feel his eyes following them all the way down the street. "Ah, the famous Miss Armstrong," he said when she opened the door to him. "Oliver Alleyne," he said. He was accompanied by a dog, small and cross-looking.
"I'm afraid Mr. Gibbons isn't here,"
Juliet said. Entering the living room in a proprietorial manner, Oliver Alleyne said, "So, this is where Perry hides out, is it?" He was very good-looking. "It was you I wanted to talk to."
"Me?"
He set his hat impertinently on top of Perry's roll-top, next to the bust of Beethoven. Picking up the bust, he said, "God, this thing weighs a ton. You could kill someone with it. Who's it meant to be?"
"Beethoven, sir."
"Is that so?" He replaced the bust and perched himself casually on a corner of her own desk. "I was wondering if you had any spare time."
"Not really."
"I hear Miss Carter Jenkins is doing splendid work," Oliver Alleyne said. "Getting close to Mrs. Scaife and so on. Little tete-a-tete." Yes, Juliet was a great success with Mrs. Scaife, Mrs. Ambrose had reported to Perry. She had spent several afternoons now taking tea in Pelham Place. The Red Book was referred to once or twice, and Mrs. Scaife gave the distinct impression that it was somewhere in the house, but didn't elaborate.
Perry had supplied Juliet with a tiny secret camera, hidden in a cigarette lighter. So far, however, Juliet had had little opportunity to use it. MI5 believed that the Right Club kept in touch with its contacts in Germany through a third party in the Belgian embassy, and Perry was keen to see whom Mrs. Scaife was corresponding with. He had dispatched Juliet to an obscure department in the GPO at Dollis Hill to learn how to open and reseal envelopes, as well as how to prise open locks on briefcases and trunks and so on. She was eager to put some of these newfound skills into practice.
Yes, actually I'm going to Pelham Place for tea this afternoon, she said to Oliver Alleyne. What is it exactly that you want, sir?
It's rather delicate. It concerns our friend Godfrey Toby.
Godfrey?
Yes. I would like you to keep an eye on him for me. For anything that strikes you as odd.
Odd?
Juliet echoed. Out of the ordinary. Out of character, he said. Juliet was surprised. Godfrey was the model of probity. Has anything struck you recently?
Well, he was late a couple of days ago, Juliet said. A delay on the Underground.
Of course, there had been that rather odd thing last week, when she had spied Godfrey Toby sitting on a bench. There was a newspaper, The Times, beside him on the bench. He looked so peaceful in repose that Juliet couldn't bring herself to disturb him. On the other hand, it seemed rather rude to behave as if he wasn't there. Before she could resolve this dilemma, he stood up unexpectedly and walked away. He had left his newspaper on the bench. If she hurried, she could perhaps catch him up and return it to him. Before she could reach his abandoned bench, however, a man came walking quickly along the path. He was large and imposing, and wearing a heavy overcoat with an astrakhan collar. He strode past the bench, and as he did so, swooped up the Times and carried it off without breaking his stride. Juliet trotted after Godfrey, thinking she would at least say hello now that his meditation was over. She recognized one of his gloves lying on the path, leather, lined with wool, rather worn, and she stooped to pick it up. How much more jetsam was he going to discard in his wake, she wondered. She picked up her pace and managed to tag the sleeve of his overcoat. He turned, looking really quite alarmed. He held up his cane, rather menacingly. But then he recognized her, and the alarm on his face was replaced by surprise.
"It's only me, Mr. Toby," she said. "You dropped a glove."
"Why, thank you, Miss Armstrong," he said. "Were you following me?"
"No, not at all. I was on my way home."
"Ah, perhaps I can escort you as far as the Albert Hall." They chatted inconsequentially. And yet, the way the man in the astrakhan-collared coat had pounced so swiftly on Godfrey's Times, almost as if he had been waiting for it. "Anything?" Oliver Alleyne asked.
"No, sir. He never does anything out of the ordinary."
It was a question of loyalty, really, wasn't it? Or trust, perhaps? She trusted Godfrey in a way that, instinctively, she didn't trust Oliver Alleyne. "Why?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "Well, no one is entirely innocent of everything, Miss Armstrong." Oliver Alleyne retrieved his hat from the roll-top and said, "I'll be off then." The dog woke up instantly and sat to attention expectantly. "And please, as I said, keep this between the two of us, Miss Armstrong."
"Not Perry?"
"Especially not Perry. Godfrey is Perry's man."
"I'm Perry's girl,"
she pointed out. "I don't think you're anyone's girl, Miss Armstrong." He moved towards the door. The dog remained where it was, and Juliet said,
"Sir, Mr. Alleyne, you've forgotten your dog."
He turned to look at the dog and said, "Oh, it's not mine. I thought you could perhaps do me the favour of looking after it for a short while."
"Me?" she said, startled.
Its name is Lily. Apparently it's a miniature schnauzer." The dog, which had been gazing uneasily up at Oliver Alleyne, now turned its attention to Juliet. She hadn't realized that a dog could look doubtful. "The owner has had to go abroad," he said.
"For you? For MI5?
"On the condition that we take care of her dog. The dog is a kind of ransom, I suppose you could say."
"I don't know anything about dogs," Juliet said.
"Well, now's your chance to learn," he said cheerfully. The ribbon on the Imperial needed changing. Juliet wondered how much more she could get out of it.
"Did you listen to this yesterday, Cyril? The bit where they're talking about how to dispose of a body?"
Cyril laughed.
"The coal hole at the Carlton Club will know where to look if Godfrey disappears."
Lily had been following Juliet around hopefully. "Sorry, we're not going for a walk," she said to the dog, crouching down and giving it a compensatory kiss on the top of its silky head. Juliet knew a little more about the dog's provenance now, thanks to Perry, as well as something of its erstwhile owner's pedigree.
"Hungarian, quite mad," Perry said.
Lily's owner, the mad Hungarian, was called Nellie Varga, and, according to Perry, had been caught spying for the Germans.
"She was given a choice. She could go quietly to the gallows, or she could work for us instead. And now she's on a mission for us in France, and we need her to come back, and that," he said, indicating the dog, "is what will make sure she does. It's the only method we have, really, of controlling her."
"Apart from the noose."
The Germans were knocking on Belgium's door, and after Belgium it would be France's turn. In the meantime, the dog had been converted too. Blithely unaware of its ransomed status, it seemed to have transferred its love wholesale to Juliet and Cyril. Even the monastically untouchable Perry was pulled into its circle of warmth and could often be found sitting on the sofa with Lily on his lap, absent-mindedly stroking her soft ears.
"A party? A soirée? You will come, dear, won't you?" Mrs. Scaife said.
"I'd love to," Juliet said. The soirée was to be a gathering of like-minded people. Perry had bought Juliet a new frock for the party.
"And I thought this would help,"
Perry said, producing a little green leather box. When she opened it, there was a pair of diamond earrings nestling inside.
"Diamonds,"
he said, as if she might not know what they were.
"Rather good, or so I'm told. Insured, but try not to lose them. They're to be returned tomorrow."
As instructed, the morning after Mrs. Scaife's soirée, Juliet went to return the diamond earrings to the jeweller's. As fate would have it, when she entered the shop, she encountered, of all people, Mrs. Scaife herself. It seemed an odd coincidence, but then that was the nature of coincidence, Juliet supposed. It always seemed odd.
"Oh, Iris, dearest. Fancy seeing you here. Have you come to browse? I'm just bringing in some pieces for cleaning."
"Actually, I'm looking for a christening bracelet. My sister's baby."
How nice it felt to say, "my sister."
"I would love to stay and help you choose, but I have lunch at the Ritz with Bunny Hepburn."
Mrs. Scaife turned to address a man behind the counter.
"Can you find a nice selection of christening bracelets for Miss Carter Jenkins?"
"Madam," the man behind the counter prompted when Mrs. Scaife had steered her way out of the shop, "can I tempt you with any of these bracelets?"
"No," Juliet said. "I'm terribly sorry. I'm in a bit of a rush."
She hot-footed it round to Pelham Place. Mrs. Scaife would be hours at lunch, and this was the perfect opportunity to look for the red book. All she needed was for poor little Dodds to let her in.
"Hello, Dodds." "Hello, miss," Dodds said shyly. "Mrs. Scaife isn't here, miss." "Oh, that's all right. I'm afraid I left something when I was here the other day. It was something very small, a ring. Can I come in and look for it?" "I'm not allowed to let anyone in when Mrs. Scaife isn't here, miss. I'll be in and out in a shake of the lamb's proverbial tail, honestly."
Dodds sighed.
"Promise, miss?"
Juliet rummaged amongst the salmon damask cushions, overseen by a nervous Dodds. It was very off-putting.
"Do you know, Dodds," Juliet said, "I'm absolutely parched. Do you think you could make me a cup of tea?" "I shouldn't leave you alone in here, miss."
Honourable and upright, Juliet thought. Miles Merton would have recruited Beatrice Dodds.
She said, "Beatrice, my name isn't Iris Carter-Jenkins. It's Juliet Armstrong. I work for the government."
It was true, and yet it felt oddly like a lie, as if she were acting the part of being herself.
"You'll be doing your country an enormous service if you help me."
A small pause for effect.
"I believe Mrs. Scaife is a traitor."
Dodds needed no other explanation. She bobbed a little curtsy, directed more towards her king and country than Juliet.
"What are you looking for, miss?" "A book. It's red." "The red book?"
"Yes. Have you seen it?"
"I think so, miss. Mrs. Scaife keeps it in the—"
She was interrupted by the unmistakable sound of the front door opening, and Mrs. Scaife's voice calling, "Dodds? Dodds, where are you?" Juliet and Beatrice stared at each other in horror. "The Ritz got my reservation wrong. They claimed that there were no tables free. Well, that was nonsense." Beatrice was the first to come to her senses.
"Upstairs,"
she whispered urgently.
"Go up. Hide."
As she put her foot on the first tread, Juliet suddenly remembered her handbag, sitting where she had left it in plain sight on the carpet. The handbag was quite distinctive. Red leather, with a shoulder strap and a clasp that looked like a buckle. She would surely recognize it as the one that Iris was carrying when she met her in the jeweller's. If she looked inside it, she would find it contained not Iris's, but Juliet's identity card and ration book, not to mention her security pass. At least the Mauser wasn't in there. Iris had that, and Juliet always kept the keys to Dolphin Square in her coat pocket for convenience. Nonetheless, it would hardly take a genius to realize that Iris was actually someone called Juliet Armstrong, and that she had been sent into the lion's den to spy. She could hear Mrs. Scaife getting nearer. "Dodds, bring me some tea, will you? Where are you?" Juliet grabbed Beatrice's hand as the girl turned to go. She felt her quivering with fear, and hissed, "My handbag, in the living room." Beatrice grimaced and nodded her understanding. It was like a nasty game of hide-and-seek, Juliet thought, as she ran up the stairs. She dived into the first room she came to, Mrs. Scaife's bedroom, by the look of it. Juliet could hear the sound of Mrs. Scaife's heavy tread on the stairs. "Bring the tea up to my bedroom, Dodds. I'm going to have a little lie-down." Oh, for heaven's sake, Juliet thought. The bedroom overlooked the back garden, and a tough old Virginia creeper ran past the balcony. She reached out and grabbed the creeper, and then climbed awkwardly over the little balcony. She proceeded to shin gingerly down the creeper to the garden below.
"I bumped into Mrs. Scaife in town, and she invited me back to tea in Pelham Place," she reported eagerly to Perry on her return to Dolphin Square. "And the red book is there, according to Mrs. Scaife's maid. Her name's Beatrice. I think she could be useful to us. I had to escape through an upstairs window," she added breathlessly.
"Goodness," Perry said. "Look what happens when you're let off the leash, Miss Armstrong." Juliet returned to Pelham Place the following morning, as invited by Mrs. Scaife in the jeweller's. The door was opened by a new girl, tall and pale and rather sickly-looking.
"Where's Dodds?" Juliet asked.
Who?
Iris, is that you? Mrs. Scaife called down from upstairs. Do come up, dear.
Mrs. Scaife sent the girl to make coffee.
"Where's Dodds?"
Juliet asked lightly.
Dodds? She took off, can you believe, without a by your leave.
"What about her belongings? Did she take them with her?"
Juliet asked.
No, she left everything behind in her room. Nothing of value. I've had the trouble of clearing it all out."
Nightingale, in the act of pouring coffee, glanced at Mrs. Scaife. Mrs. Scaife handed Juliet a cup.
"Do have a scone."
The tray, Juliet noticed, was set for 3, and she asked,
"Is Mrs. Ambrose coming?"
"No, a new friend. She is a little late."
On cue, the doorbell rang, and Juliet listened as Nightingale herded someone upstairs. Juliet almost spilt her coffee when she heard the familiar, querulous Scandinavian tones. Trude. Juliet couldn't wait to get back to Dolphin Square and tell Perry about Mrs. Scaife's visitor, but had to endure a good deal of prattling about the imminence of German victory in Europe and how lovely the Bavarian countryside was at this time of year. Nightingale saw Juliet to the door.
"Nightingale,"
Juliet said, dropping her voice,
"was there a handbag amongst Dodd's things?"
Yes, miss.
"Red leather, shoulder strap, clasp that looks like a buckle?"
No, miss, nothing like that.
The battle for France was underway. German panzer divisions were tearing their way through the Ardennes. Amiens was under siege, and Arras was surrounded. But in London, summer had begun, and on a Saturday afternoon it was still a pleasure to take a dog for a walk in a park. Juliet spotted the unremarkable yet unmistakable figure of Godfrey Toby. He was walking slowly, yet purposefully, near the round pond. She decided to follow him. He didn't turn round once, and, to her surprise, his path swerved abruptly and led him into the Brompton Oratory. Rather warily, Juliet followed him in. She quietly pulled the dog into one of the pews at the back. From here she could see Godfrey, hat in hand now, strolling along one of the side aisles in the direction of the altar, more like a flaneur than a man intending worship. Tap, tap, tap went his cane on the stone floor. And then, with only the slightest pause and an admirable sleight of hand, he removed a piece of paper from his overcoat pocket and seemed to tuck it into what Juliet presumed must be a gap between a pilaster and one of the many elaborate memorials on the wall. Juliet bobbed down hastily and pretended to be at prayer. When she eventually mustered the courage to look up, she found that there was no sign of him. She clambered to her feet and was about to investigate Godfrey's little act of legerdemain when the man in the astrakhan-collared coat made another appearance. The man walked briskly up to the memorial and, without any hesitation, removed whatever it was that Godfrey had concealed there, before turning on his heel and making for the exit at the same brisk pace. The astrakhan-collared man left the oratory as rapidly as he had entered it, and if he had seen her, he made no sign of it. But he frightened her in a way that the war didn't. "Anything to tell me, Miss Armstrong?" Oliver Alleyne was leaning casually on the bonnet of a car parked on Chichester Street, at the back entrance of Dolphin Square.
"About Mr. Toby?"
"Anything suspicious?"
"No,"
Juliet said. She didn't like Oliver Alleyne, but she supposed it was her duty to say something about Godfrey's clandestine meetings. Sometimes she found herself wondering if all was as it seemed. What if Godfrey really was a Gestapo agent? A Gestapo agent pretending to be an MI5 agent, pretending to be a Gestapo agent. It made her head hurt to think about it. And how perfectly placed he would be, the puppet master of a network of sympathizers. She wished she could talk to Perry about it, but Oliver Alleyne had told her not to say anything to anyone. After some hesitation, she typed a cryptically short note to Alleyne. "I have something to discuss with you." On the envelope she wrote, "To be delivered directly into the hand of O. Alleyne." It was only when she paused to consider elevensies, although it was only 10:30, that she heard an odd noise coming from Perry's bedroom. There had been no sign of life in the Dolphin Square flat when she arrived this morning, so she had presumed Perry was elsewhere. Juliet got up from her desk and knocked cautiously. There was no answer, so she opened the door warily. Lily, less daunted, pushed the door open wider and entered Perry's bedroom. Perry was kneeling by his bed, as if in prayer. He turned to look at her, and she could see that his face was soaked with tears. Was he ill? He seemed wounded in some way, although not by anything visible. Lily licked his hand encouragingly, but his attitude remained one of despair. "Can I do something, sir?" she asked. "You can't help me," he said bleakly. "No one can." She shut the door quietly and got on with her work. Was it a coincidence that this episode followed a visit yesterday from a pair of special branch officers? They had closeted themselves with Perry in the living room, from which Juliet had been summarily banished. She left the door to the living room slightly open, so she was able to hear one of the special branch officers say, "Mr. Gibbons, could you tell us where you were last night?" She envied the dog's hearing. All she could catch was Perry muttering something about the War Office. She clipped on the dog's lead and left. She knew exactly where Perry was last night, because she had seen him. She had been in the Rivoli bar at the Ritz, drinking cocktails with Clarissa. At the end of the evening, Juliet had spotted Perry exiting the basement bar. The Ritz below the Ritz, she'd heard it called. Someone had told her that it was also known as the Pink Sink, because it was painted pink, presumably, although Clarissa hooted with laughter at this idea. "Come on," Clarissa said, looping her arm through Juliet's and pulling her in the opposite direction from Perry. "Let's go this way. I don't think he's going to want to see us." Glancing over her shoulder, she saw a man in naval uniform, a rating, approaching Perry. Perry had clasped his hands around those of the rating in order to steady the lighter. The flare of the little flame had illuminated Perry's features, revealing a tortured expression on his face, as if he was being forced to do something he disliked. But he doesn't smoke, Juliet thought. Godfrey had no meeting with his informants, so Juliet and Perry were alone in Dolphin Square, working diligently late in preparation. "Ducks in a row, Miss Armstrong," Perry said. "Ducks in a row." When they finished, they listened to the 9 o'clock news, sitting companionably on the Dolphin Square sofa with a glass of whiskey each. Perry said, "Miss Armstrong?" "Hmm?" He frowned, as if he was having difficulty formulating the next sentence, and then, without any warning, he dropped like a penitent to his knees on the carpet in front of her. "Miss Armstrong, would you do me the honour of consenting to be my wife?" "I'm sorry?" "Will you marry me?" "You should stay the night," Perry said. "Doesn't that make sense? The blackout and so on." Juliet had been so dumbstruck by his proposal that she had said neither yes nor no, but had mumbled something that he seemed to take as an acceptance. Perry handed her a pair of his pyjamas to wear. He patted the bed as though he was encouraging Lily to jump up and join him. She climbed into the chilly bed and lay expectantly. He arched over her, and she closed her eyes, but all she received was a dry kiss on her cheek. "Good night, then," he said, and turned off his bedside light. And that was how they slept, modestly, side by side, as chaste as effigies on an icy tomb. Juliet gazed helplessly at Perry's sleeping profile in the darkness. Was a little passion too much to ask for? A bit of melting and swooning? Perhaps sex was something you had to learn and then stick at until you were good at it, like hockey or the piano, but an initial lesson would be helpful. She must have fallen into sleep eventually, because she was jolted out of it by a loud hammering on the door. Perry clambered out of bed like a scalded cat, almost as if he was expecting trouble. Had Paris fallen? She could hear voices in the hall, and then Perry came back, looking bemused but rather relieved, and said, "You'd better put some clothes on. Your presence is requested." Not Paris, then. "There are some detectives from Scotland Yard here. They seem to think that you're dead." Two serious-looking men, one quite tall, the other quite short, were waiting in the living room. "Here she is," Perry said, uncharacteristically bright. He introduced her. "My fiancée, Miss Armstrong." "Perhaps Miss Armstrong could show us some identification," the tall detective said. He smiled encouragingly at her. "Well," Juliet said, "you see, the thing is, my bag was stolen a few days ago, near Victoria Station." "Can you describe your handbag for us, Miss Armstrong?" the tall detective said. Of the two, he seemed more inclined to be pleasant. "Red leather, shoulder strap, clasped like a buckle. Have you found it?" "I'm afraid to say," the short detective said, "that we have. It was with a young lady whose body was found yesterday." "Body?" Perry said. "Dead." "I'm afraid so." "Some kind of accident?" "Murdered," the short detective said bluntly. Beatrice, Juliet thought, and gave a little cry of pain, and Perry said, "Juliet?" in a concerned way that was touching. "Murdered?" he puzzled to the detective. "I'm afraid so, sir," the taller, nicer detective said. "Would you have any idea who the young lady might be, Miss Armstrong?" Perry's hand on her back became a grip, so she supposed she was to say nothing. "No," Juliet whispered. "I don't, I'm afraid. No idea at all." "And she was found where?" Perry asked. "She was discovered in the coal hole of the Carlton Club." "The Carlton Club?" Perry echoed. He exchanged a glance with Juliet. He had obviously read the transcript of Trude's conversation with Godfrey. "Sir," the short detective said, "does that mean something to you?" "No, not at all." The detectives, both tall and short, left eventually, but neither of them seemed entirely satisfied. Perry closed the front door and turned to her. "What on earth is going on?" "My handbag wasn't stolen," she said in a rush. "I left it in Mrs. Scaife's house, but I didn't want to tell you because it was my handbag, not Iris's, and I thought I could get it back. And I thought you'd be annoyed because I was so careless. The diamond earrings were in the handbag. I didn't have time to return them before I bumped into Mrs. Scaife in Garrard's. The dead girl must be Beatrice Dodds, Mrs. Scaife's maid. I thought she'd run off, but now I think perhaps she was trying to return the bag to me and they found out and killed her. We can't know anything for sure. In fact, we can't know for sure it is this maid.
Beatrice.
We have to be certain. Someone will have to identify her. You'll have to go to the mortuary.
The mortuary assistant was reluctant to display the body to Juliet.
Can't you identify her from her clothes, miss? It's not the sort of thing a young lady should be looking at.
I have to see her face.
I will not be sick, Juliet thought. I will not dishonour her with revulsion. Miss, the mortuary assistant prompted gently. He replaced the sheet, covering Beatrice's small, tragic face. Is this your sister, Miss Wilson? The assistant asked softly. Juliet was posing as Madge Wilson, although no one at the mortuary had asked her to prove herself.
Yes,
she murmured.
This is my sister, Ivy. Ivy Wilson.
Juliet had a birth certificate in the name of Ivy Wilson, forged by MI5. You're sure, miss? You know there was a bit of a mix-up to begin with.
How awful, she murmured. No, this is definitely Ivy.
Juliet felt a sob rising in her chest. I'm afraid that there are some forms that have to be filled in, the mortuary assistant said. Perry said, I don't suppose those earrings turned up.
Afraid not.
He shrugged indifferently and said, Garrards have them insured. So, we're using our powers to bypass the usual police procedures. She's been taken to an undertaker's in Ladbroke Grove. She'll be buried in Kensal Green on Friday. A thought has struck me, Perry said. He reached for her hand across the starchy white tablecloth in Simpson's. He had taken her to dinner to cheer her up after the mortuary. He seemed unmoved by Beatrice's death, as if she were just one more casualty of war, a girl, a nobody, a mouse. I was thinking that if this was a case of mistaken identity, then whoever killed this girl— Beatrice, Juliet said wearily. Yes, might have thought that they were killing you. She was carrying your handbag, your identity papers. Think of it as an adventure, Perry had said right at the beginning of all this. And it had seemed like one. A bit of a lark, something from Buchan or Erskine Childers, she had thought. A girl's own adventure. But it wasn't an adventure, was it? Perry seemed in good spirits again. We have this American chap in our sights, he told Juliet. He's called Chester Vanderkamp. He works at the American Embassy in the cipher department. He's fiercely against America joining the war, admires the Germans, has it in for the Jews. This chap Vanderkamp codes and decodes some of the most sensitive telegrams. The bad news is that this Vanderkamp is considering sharing this information with the Germans.
And yet you seem egregiously cheerful, Juliet said.
He smiled his lovely smile. Kiss me, she thought. Some hope. Because Mr. Vanderkamp wishes to meet Mrs. Scaife. He has been told about her contacts abroad. He is entirely sympathetic to her politics. We can catch them both red-handed and stop those bloody telegrams getting out. They will need a go-between, Perry said.
Me?
You. Exactly. The wheels were set in motion. 11 o'clock the following morning was the time designated for the arrests. Juliet had stayed the night in Dolphin Square again. She had received the same dry good-night kiss and had lain in the effigy position once again, while Perry slept what seemed an untroubled sleep next to her. She woke early and made tea. Ah, you're up, Perry said, making her jump. And tea too, splendid. Are you ready for the end game?
Mr. Vanderkamp, do come in, Juliet said.
He was shorter than she had expected. She led him through to the living room, and there were introductions all round.
"I think we know some of the same people," Mrs. Scaife said, every inch the society hostess.
"I think we do, ma'am," he said, every inch the guest. The rats were in the trap. They had excellent manners for rats. And then, finally, the telegrams were produced.
"Here we go,"
Juliet said to Mrs. Scaife, who frowned and said,
"What do you mean, dear?"
A swarm of assorted policemen entered the flat. Mrs. Scaife gave a little scream and struggled to her feet, and Chester Vanderkamp said, "What the heck?" Juliet recognized the tall detective from the other morning. He tipped his hat at her. Mrs. Scaife dissolved into a puddle of lace on the sofa.
"Iris, dear," she said feebly, "I don't understand."
Before Juliet could say anything, Perry appeared.
"I'll kill you, you little traitor!"
Chester Vanderkamp yelled at Juliet as they hauled him away.
"I wouldn't worry,"
the tall detective said to Juliet.
"He probably won't."
And that was that. The end of the operation meant the end of their careers as spies, apparently. Perry took them all to Prunier's for a late lunch. Cyril was included in the party and was overwhelmed into silence.
"Time and tide wait for no man," Perry said. "Or woman, for that matter. Back to work, Miss Armstrong."
Juliet sighed and said,
"Come along, Cyril. Let's return to the fray."
When she delved into her coat pocket for the key to Dolphin Square, her hand closed on the little green leather box. She had slipped the diamond earrings in there when she had bumped into Mrs. Scaife in Garrard's and couldn't quite bring herself to return them. A girl could be forgiven for forgetting. 1950. Juliet was arming herself mentally for the afternoon's recording of past lives. Most history for schools was of the dramatized kind. The war had made the world weary of facts, Juliet supposed. Today's programme was entitled Life in an English Medieval Village.
"We definitely need geese," Juliet said. "They had a lot of geese in the Middle Ages."
Daisy Gibbs handed her an envelope. "This arrived for you, Miss Armstrong." Juliet examined the envelope while the girl in effects was trying to locate a flageolet. When she opened it, with a degree of caution, there was a folded-up piece of notepaper, no heading, with one sentence written on it. Really, she thought, they couldn't even... "Miss Armstrong, I found the flageolet. I had to go to music." The girl from effects sounded breathless, as if she'd been chasing the flageolet around the building. She had just settled back at her desk when a BBC boy, they were the cadets of the corporation, delivered another envelope to her desk. Juliet Armstrong was written on it in a sloppy, rather foreign-looking hand. This one was of a quite different quality to the one that Daisy had handed to her earlier. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of ruled paper, quite small, torn from a notebook. In the same scrawly hand as her name on the envelope, someone had written, "You will pay for what you did." Juliet leapt up from her desk as if she'd been bitten by a plague-carrying rat, ran out into the corridor after the boy, and said, so sharply that he cowered, "Who gave you that note?" "Reception, miss. Do you want to send a reply?" he asked meekly. "No." Passing sentence, Lord Chief Justice Lord Goddard said, "You have betrayed the hospitality and protection given to you by this country with the grossest treachery." Juliet was reading her own later edition of the Standard while she ate supper. You will pay for what you did. Fuchs was going to pay now. But who wants me to pay, she wondered. And for what? Her life seemed littered with misdeeds. Her mind was still occupied with Godfrey Toby's snub. There was no way in the world that he didn't recognise her. There was a covenant of guilt between them. Had he been sent a bill of reckoning too? She fetched the envelope from her handbag and read again the note that Daisy had given her. The Flamingo will arrive at 9 p.m. Who in their right minds would think she was having a flamingo delivered? The note had been written by Hartley, of course. It wasn't a flamingo, obviously. It was a Czech being brought out of Vienna through Berlin on an RAF transport. A scientist, something to do with metals, not that she really wanted to know. By tomorrow night he would be gone on the way to somewhere else, Harwell or America or somewhere more obscure. Recently, MI5 had asked Juliet to run an occasional safe house for them. Having worked for the security service throughout the war, they seemed to think they had some kind of claim on her trustworthiness. It was a dull business, more like babysitting than espionage. Juliet turned the wireless on and promptly fell asleep. When she woke, someone was knocking on the front door of her flat, so gently as to be almost inaudible. She had been expecting the usual indistinguishable grey men, but instead it was the RAF, a squadron leader. "Miss Armstrong, vermilion is the word of today, and this is Mr. Smith. I believe he is to stay here tonight?" The two officers stepped aside to reveal the Czech, standing between two RAF policemen. He looked more like a prisoner than a defector. He was wearing an overcoat that was clearly too big for him, and clutching a small, battered leather suitcase.
"You'd better come in," she said to him. "My name is Juliet."
"Pavel."
"Good,"
she said brightly. Poor blighter, she thought. He was white with exhaustion. She made up a bed for him on the sofa. He was still holding on to the leather suitcase when, almost immediately, he fell asleep. Juliet gently prized the handle of the suitcase out of his hand, tucked in the blanket around him, and turned off the light. From its snug hideaway, in a left boot in the wardrobe, she removed the Mauser that Perry Gibbons had given her. She kept it loaded, but it made her feel slightly sick to handle it now in the light of Godfrey Toby's resurrection. "We must finish her off, I'm afraid." Juliet placed the little gun on her bedside table. It was Perry, of course, who had been Godfrey's case officer in the beginning, but Perry left the service in 1940, and she had seen next to nothing of him since. These days he wrote books and gave lectures about nature. He was a regular on Children's Hour these days, where he was known as Mr. Nature. Juliet woke to bright and early with Marcel Gardner and the Serenade Orchestra on the radio. It seemed an unnecessarily cheerful way to start the day. There was a loud knock at the door. It was a messenger boy from Curzon Street. He was an inferior species to the BBC boys.
"There is a bell," Juliet said.
"Vermilion," the messenger boy said by way of introduction. "You're to bring the Flamingo to the Strand Palace Hotel." Eventually she managed to bring down a taxi and hustle Pavel into it before saying, as quietly as she could, to the driver, "The Strand Palace Hotel, please." They were about to move off when the passenger door on Juliet's side was wrenched open. Pavel screamed like a fox, and Juliet thought about the little Mauser and how handy it would be for moments like these. But then she realized that the person hijacking their cab was Hartley.
"For God's sake, Hartley," she scowled at him.
"He's a friend," she said soothingly to Pavel, prodding Hartley in the chest to demonstrate. "Friend. Also, he's an idiot." "Am I a friend?" Hartley asked curiously.
"No, I was trying to make him feel better."
Juliet and Hartley had long ago abandoned manners with each other. The driver seemed reluctant to take instruction, and they drove round into Burley Street, and then out onto the Strand itself, before he was finally persuaded that they really did want to go to where they said they did. Hartley opened the door of the cab and said to Juliet, "All clear," and to Pavel, "Shall we?" gesturing like a footman for him to step out of the cab. The indistinguishable grey men had put in an appearance today. They were sitting in the lobby. One was drinking tea, the other was reading the Times. She looked around and found that Hartley had disappeared, and she'd been left to do this on her own. When they caught sight of Juliet, the two men stood up, abandoning their props. "Oh, here we go," she thought. "Miss Armstrong," the tea drinker said. "Thank you. We'll take him from here." They led him away. Pavel looked back at her, an expression tantamount to terror on his face. He looked like a man being led to the gallows.
"They're taking him somewhere in Kent," Hartley said in her ear. "Don't sneak up on me like that. What's in Kent?" "Someone's country house. Make him feel at ease and then scoop out the contents of his brain. I believe he's on his way to Los Alamos. A present for the Yanks. Good of us, eh?"
Very. Good of us to acquire the contents of his brain first, too. I don't suppose we're telling the Americans that. I expect they would be rather annoyed.
"I expect they would. He got out with original blueprints, you know. Soviets will have to start from scratch again with his research. Do you want a drink?"
he added hopefully. "Just coffee. I need to talk to you." "Godfrey Toby," she said, once the waitress had deposited a pot of coffee in front of them. Hartley took out a small hip flask and added something from it to his cup.
"Who?"
"Don't be stupid, Hartley. I know you remember him. He posed as a Gestapo agent and swept up all the fifth columnists during the war. Perry Gibbons was his handler at first. He set up the operation. I worked with him in Dolphin Square. His real name was John Hazeldine."
"Oh, old Toby Jug. Why didn't you say? He was in Berlin after the war. Or maybe it was Vienna."
Hartley drained his coffee cup. Sighing, he said,
"I was in Vienna, you know. It was a complete hellhole. You couldn't trust anyone."
"Can you now?"
He gave her a sideways glance.
"I trust you."
Juliet supposed he was drunk. He was always drunk to one degree or another, even at this time of day.
"Do you think he really was in danger from reprisals?"
"We're all in danger. All the time."
"Yes, but from reprisals from the war? From his informants?"
Hartley laughed dismissively.
"Storm in a teacup, all that stuff about the fifth column. Anyway, you were looking at the wrong people. You should have been looking at the communists."
Hartley tipped the hip flask up and shook the last drops into his mouth.
"I suppose I should report back to the powers that be that everything went like clockwork. Thank Christ. You know that Oliver Alleyne is Deputy Director General now?"
"I heard."
"He's rather ambitious," she remembered Perry saying.
"He's a slippery sod. Did very well out of the war. Merton, of course, has parted ways with the service. Taken up a post at the National Gallery."
"Really?
Don't you keep in touch?"
Why should we?"
She had a sudden image of Pavel's face, the look of fear, and the grey men. They had given her no password, no colour of any shade. What a nonsense it all was. Juliet turned on the wireless, looking for the news and finding the end of Children's Hour. Perry Gibbons. Of course it would be him. Life was nothing more than a long chain of coincidences. He was talking about beetles. If you look carefully, children, you will find that there are shield bugs everywhere. Really? Juliet thought, casting a rather apprehensive glance around the room. She had been wondering if she would bump into Perry. She hadn't seen him since he left the service during the war. Had he left the service? Or was it just the pretense of leaving? She was getting ready for bed when there was a noisy banging on the door. She stood behind the door and said, "Who is it?" "It's Hartley. Open up." She did, but grudgingly. He was wretchedly drunk, which she attributed to the near-empty bottle of rum in his hand. "Is he here?"
Is who here? Juliet puzzled.
"The flaming flamingo. Who else?"
The Czech? Pavel? No, of course not.
"Flown the coop," he said. "Never turned up in Kent." Juliet thought of the indistinguishable grey men. England wasn't the only country to breed them like that.
Even you couldn't be that careless, Hartley.
"I wasn't the last one with him," he said, turning petulant. She sighed.
You'd better come in. I was about to make cocoa.
"Cocoa?"
Hartley echoed incredulously. Yes, it will do you good. But when she came back with the 2 cups, Hartley was asleep, still in a sitting position. She tipped him onto his side and fetched a blanket. 2 nights running she'd had men sleeping on her sofa, one a complete stranger, the other irritatingly familiar. She locked her bedroom door in case a befuddled Hartley fumbled his way through in the middle of the night, mistaking her room for the bathroom. Juliet put the little Mauser next to the Filetta radio. It was best to be ready, even if you had no idea what it was you were ready for. And if the worst came to the worst, she could always shoot Hartley, who was snoring like a goods train next door. She had never been sure about Hartley. He had no real centre. It wouldn't bother him to play for the other side. You will pay for what you did. The war was a clumsily stitched wound, and it felt as if it was being opened by something. Or someone. Was it Godfrey Toby? I must find him, she thought. Perhaps I must find them all. I will be the hunter, not the hunted. Diana, not the stag. The arrow, not the bow. Hartley was gone when Juliet woke the next morning. Only the empty rum bottle remained as evidence that he had ever been in her flat. Making her way to the underground, Juliet felt a frisson of fear, an animal instinct that told her she was being followed. Taking a detour, she got off the tube at Regent Street and headed to Oxford Street to get on another line. She entered a Woolworths through the front entrance and exited through the back. She was on high alert, and when a rather drab-looking woman, marooned in middle age, bumped into her, she was forced to suppress a cry of alarm. The woman was wearing a headscarf patterned with yellow and green parrots and was carrying a battered leatherette shopping bag on her arm. Even in the grip of her own paranoia, Juliet could acknowledge that it was an unlikely guise for an assassin. When the train arrived, she got in and then got out again just as the doors were closing. When the next train arrived, she climbed aboard and took a seat. Glancing out of the window as the train began to pull away from the platform, something unnerving occurred. The woman Juliet had bumped into outside Woolworths, she of the parrot headscarf and leatherette shopping bag, appeared from nowhere and slid onto the bench next to a man with pockmarked skin and pebble eyes. The 2 of them stared silently at Juliet, like a pair of resentful bookends. Then the train hauled itself into the blackness of the tunnel, and they disappeared from sight. Who were they? Some kind of odd husband and wife team? What on earth was going on? Juliet hadn't a clue. And everything is transient after all, isn't it?
Juliet mused over a rather disconsolate cup of coffee with Prendergast. It had started as a relatively cheerful discussion about classroom feedback for a series for seniors called Can I Introduce You? But somehow an assessment of Can I Introduce You to Sir Thomas More had led them into the doldrums.
People become hopelessly caught up in dogma and doctrine.
Isms, Prendergast said, shaking his head dolefully.
Exactly. Fascism, communism, capitalism. We lose sight of the ideal that propelled them, and yet millions die in defence of, or attack on, those beliefs.
Juliet thought of the fugitive flamingo. Where was he?
People are dying for capitalism?
Prendergast asked curiously.
Well, people have always died having their labour exploited for other people's profit. All the way back to the pharaohs and beyond, I suppose.
True, very true.
Doctrine's just a refuge, though, isn't it? If we were to admit that essentially nothing has meaning, that we only attribute meaning to things, that there is no such thing as absolute truth,
we would despair, Prendergast said softly, his bulldog face wilting.
L'homme est condamné à être libre, Juliet said.
I'm sorry, my French is a little rusty.
Man is condemned to be free.
Aren't we talking existentialism? Prendergast queried. Those French fellows? Can I introduce you to Sartre? Juliet thought. They hadn't done that. Too challenging for the seniors. For everyone, really. Juliet returned to the sanctuary of her desk to brood. On Godfrey Toby and on the flamingo. Was there some way in which the Czech's disappearance could be linked to Godfrey's reappearance? The flamingo had flown, but where had he landed? Did flamingos fly? Hartley was waiting for her on the pavement, a cigarette dangling from his lips, looking insufferably insouciant. "What do you want?" she asked him. "Shall we have a drink in the American bar? I believe the sun is below the yardarm."
"It's nowhere near."
"Yes, but it is somewhere," Hartley said. "Moscow, say?"
"Does Perry still work for the service?"
Juliet asked, once they had settled with their drinks. "Perry?" Hartley said. "Perry Gibbons? I couldn't possibly say, although no one ever really leaves, do they?"
"I did."
"Did you? And yet here we are."
"And all that children's hour stuff would be a good cover,"
Juliet said, ignoring this remark. "Well, we all have a facade," Hartley said. "Don't you?" After some hesitation, Juliet decided to show Hartley the note. She needed someone to rifle through the registry, and Hartley was the only person she knew who could do that.
"Someone left me a message," she said.
"You will pay for what you did," Hartley read out loud. He looked at her with interest. "What did you do?"
"Hard to say. Nothing I'm aware of."
"Not true."
"I think it might be something to do with Godfrey reappearing."
"The old Toby jug? Do you owe him something?"
"No, not at all. But I thought perhaps his informants, you know. I wondered if perhaps they had found out about the operation and wanted revenge in some way. Can you look in the registry for me? See if they have addresses for them?"
"Why don't you ask Alain? You can ask him about Perry and the old Toby jug as well, and this nonsense too," he said, handing the piece of paper back. "You were Alain's girl, weren't you?"
"No, quite the opposite."
"Don't look now," Hartley said when they had left the Savoy and were making their way down the Strand towards Trafalgar Square. "But I believe there's someone following us."
"Is it an odd-looking man?" Juliet said. "Quite short, pock-marked skin, one drooping eye, or a woman wearing a headscarf and carrying a shopping bag?"
"No," Hartley said. "Nobody like that at all." Schools was already shut up for the night when Juliet returned, but the great ship across the road was sailing bravely on, all lights blazing.
"Is Perry Gibbons still here?" she asked the girl on reception in the cathedral-like foyer of Broadcasting House. "He's still in the Children's Hour studio. Is he expecting you?" "Yes."
Of course he wasn't.
"Perry!"
It was unexpectedly and overwhelmingly comforting to see him. "Juliet," he said, taking hold of both her hands. "It's been a long time." He seemed genuinely delighted to see her. She could feel the warmth in his lovely smile. Perry took her to Mirabelle. He was wearing a tailored three-piece grey pinstripe, expensive and very well cut, and was looking rather handsome. I might have married this man, Juliet thought as they chinked glasses. "I wanted to ask you about something. I saw Godfrey Toby a couple of days ago." "Good Lord, there's a name from the past. How's he doing? I thought he was relocated. The Dominions."
"I heard Vienna," Juliet said.
Perry shrugged. Juliet took the note from her bag and pushed it across the table. Perry read it silently and looked at her inquiringly. "This isn't Godfrey's writing?"
"It was handed in at reception, with my name on the envelope, by a man who I think is following me, and a woman too. I wondered if they might have something to do with Godfrey's informants."
"The neighbours?" Perry said. He smiled at the word and the memory, as if they had been rendered harmless by the passage of time. Surely if anyone was going to be made to pay by them, it would be Godfrey himself. You were just a typist, after all. Well, thanks, she thought. Godfrey was a good chap, Perry continued thoughtfully. I always liked him. How is he?
"I don't know. He wouldn't speak to me."
"Good Lord, why ever not?"
"I thought you might know."
"Me?" Perry said. "I haven't seen Godfrey in 10 years, not since I left the service." They both fell silent at the memory. He spread his hands on the tablecloth, as if he might be trying to levitate the table. "I'm sorry about that time, Juliet," he said softly. "You know, everything that happened."
She said, "It's all right. I understand. I mean, heavens above." She laughed lightly. "The BBC would collapse from a staff shortage without its contingent of men like you."
He winced. "Men like me?" A frown pinched his features. "The majority is not always in the right, you know," he said quietly. "You just feel as though you are."
"Well, if it's any consolation, I've never felt myself to be in a majority."
She felt rather cross with him. It wasn't as if she'd been to blame for how it ended. "Shall we have a whiskey?" he asked, and they were friends again. When Juliet woke, she sensed that something had changed. Everything sounded deadened and muffled. Snow, she wondered? But when she looked out of the window, it was to find not snow, but an unseasonal fog that had descended in the night. A sickly yellow twilight had enveloped the streets. The fog had a greasy, gaseous feel now, and it stifled sound, so you couldn't be entirely sure of anything. Juliet could feel it trying to creep into her lungs, into her brain. Tap, tap, tap. The sinister sound had begun almost as soon as Juliet had set out. Was it shoes? Could it be a cane? A walnut, silver-topped cane? Tap, tap, tap. Perhaps I'm trapped in some awful radio drama, she thought. Jack the Ripper or something histrionic by Poe. The Telltale Heart, perhaps. Tap, tap, tap. A few yards further on, she grew aware of another sound approaching from behind her. Not the tap, tap, tap that was infesting her brain, but a heavy, clomping kind of tread. And then, without the least warning, a kind of shuffling acceleration accompanied by a banshee shriek, and then something hard whacked her on the back. The blow was heavy enough to send her flying, and she lurched forward, landing awkwardly on all fours on the pavement like a clumsy cat. Juliet scrambled quickly to her feet, braced to defend herself. Her handbag, with the Mauser inside, had been knocked out of her hand and lost somewhere in the fog, but her unseen assailants appeared to have fled. After much searching, she managed to find her handbag in the gutter. While doing so, she nearly tripped over a large black umbrella. It was furled and heavy, and she wondered if that was what had been used to strike her. The ferrule was a sturdy metal one. Tap, tap, tap. It looked sharp enough to penetrate flesh. "We must finish her off, I'm afraid." Could it have been a mistake? Could someone have simply knocked into her because of the fog? She had been felled in the blackout once by a man who was running for a bus. And yet... South Kensington Tube Station beckoned through the fog, a halo of comforting light. And then, just as she neared the bottom of the steps leading down into the station, bam! Pounced on from behind. Her aggressor must have leapt from 3 or 4 steps higher to land on her back. Juliet was knocked flat, but was quickly helped up by several horrified bystanders who thought the fall was an accident. The monkey, the woman in the parrot headscarf, no surprise there somehow, was already on her feet and shouting in a foreign language. Hungarian, if Juliet wasn't mistaken. The woman had the light of madness in her eyes and squared up to Juliet, circling around her as if they were in a boxing ring. "Lily," she hissed. "You killed my Lily." Nellie Varga, the mad Hungarian, alive and well. Juliet experienced a twitch of paranoia. Were there other people who weren't dead? "I think she's definitely dead now, Mr. Toby." What if she wasn't? What if the graves really had opened in Kensal Green Cemetery? Surely Nellie Varga hadn't been holding this grudge since the war. Juliet experienced a sudden fury and yanked Nellie Varga by her coat lapels and shook her as you would a misbehaving doll. The crowd gathered, unwilling to stop the fracas. A policeman arrived and tried to shoo people away. Now, ladies," he said. "What's all this? Fighting over a gentleman, are we?" Oh, for heaven's sake, Juliet thought. "She killed my Lily," the woman said to the policeman. "Someone killed someone?" the policeman asked, more interested now. "A dog," Juliet said to the policeman. "Lily was a dog, and I didn't kill her, and it was years ago, for goodness sake." "MI5 promised they would take care of her if I spied for them," Nellie said to the policeman. "And they didn't." "MI5?" the policeman said, raising a doubtful eyebrow. "Spying?" He had preferred it when he thought it was murder that was on offer. "She is a spy!" Nellie shouted, pointing a dramatic finger at Juliet. "You should arrest her." "What a ridiculous idea. I work at the BBC." "Come along now," the policeman said, as if they were children in the playground. "This won't do." "She has to pay for killing my dog," Nellie persisted. "She has to pay for what she did." "But how do you want me to pay?" Juliet asked crossly. "This is so unreasonable. The whole thing is absurd," Juliet said to the policeman. "It was 10 years ago. The dog would be dead of old age by now anyway." Oh, how harsh those words sounded. Juliet had loved that little dog with all her heart. She was relieved when the man with the pebble eyes persuaded a reluctant Nellie to be led away. Over her shoulder, she shouted something at Juliet in Hungarian that sounded very much like a curse. All her paranoia, Juliet thought, all her fears of being watched and followed, her suspicions about the neighbours, not to mention her confusion over Godfrey's reappearance in her life, were all baseless. How ridiculous it seemed that of all the people who might want to harm her, it would turn out to be a deranged and vengeful Nellie Varga, a woman Juliet had never even met. And for the one crime that I am entirely innocent of, she thought. No one is entirely innocent, Alain had said to her. I should have been more careful, she thought. It would be the epitaph on her grave, wouldn't it? Not beloved sister, not at home with God, but she should have been more careful. The defences to her flat were still in place. The strand of wool that she had put between the lintel and the front door was still there, but the flat itself remained in darkness when Juliet switched on the light. Had she forgotten to fill the meter? 1 meagre shilling was eventually mined from the bottom of her bag. Let there be light, Juliet murmured. But although there was a promising clicking and whirring noise from the meter, light there was none. A small shift in the air, the faintest rustle, a bird settling in a nest, breathing, a sigh. She could just make out the silhouette of someone sitting at the table. Stealthily, Juliet retrieved the Mauser from her bag and advanced cautiously towards the figure. It seemed impossible. And yet, the person who had the greatest claim on her soul, a sudden terror made her heart spasm. "Dolly," she whispered. "Is that you?" 1940. It was 2 days since Mrs. Scaife and Chester Vanderkamp had been arrested in the Bloomsbury flat. There was a soporific atmosphere in Dolphin Square. It was a warm afternoon, and the air was stifling inside the flat. "I'll put the kettle on," Cyril said. "We're late with our tea." "Thanks, Cyril." Afterwards, and there was a long afterwards, Juliet could never be sure how it happened. Perhaps they had grown careless, or perhaps it was the heat that made them drowsily inattentive. However it happened, the fact was that they were caught completely off guard. Juliet had taken her tea through to drink it in Cyril's room. They ate the last 3 biscuits, 1 each and 1 for Lily, who had woken up. Lily suddenly began to growl. She was staring fixedly at the door to the living room, and Juliet left her tea to find out what was upsetting the little dog so. An intruder. Dib, Dolly's decrepit poodle. "Dib?" Juliet puzzled to the dog. He acknowledged his name with a dismissive twitch of an ear. "What are you doing here?" "How do you know my dog's name?" "Dolly." "Bloody hell," Juliet heard Cyril murmur behind her. "We're for it now." Dolly was standing on the threshold of the living room. Dib had come in to investigate, and Dolly had pursued him in order to retrieve him. Juliet found herself seeing the flat through Dolly's eyes, the playback machines and headphones, and, most incriminating of all, folders that had "Top Secret" stencilled across them in large red capitals. "You're MI5?" Dolly said. "You've been listening to everything we say? You bloody bastards!" At that moment, Godfrey came into the flat, saying rather anxiously, "Is everything all right in here, Miss Armstrong?" "Here's Dolly," Juliet said to him, with a kind of mad enthusiasm. She felt herself teetering on the edge of hysteria. "Godfrey?" Dolly said to him. There were tears in her eyes, as though she had been scorned by a lover. "You're one of them?" "I'm afraid I am, Dolly," Godfrey said. Boiling with rage and frustration, Dolly made an unexpected lunge for the only weapon available to her, the little bust of Beethoven. She found momentum, swinging it upwards in an arc, just as Godfrey sprang forward to restrain her. He was caught on one shoulder by the bust and sent spinning off kilter. He was already clambering dazedly to his knees, but Dolly was clutching the bust by the base, raising it high, like a trophy, above his head, shouting at Cyril and Juliet. "Don't come near me! I'll smash his head with it!" Juliet did the only thing she could think of. She shot Dolly. Dolly dropped to the ground, clutching her side. Juliet put the gun on her desk and hurried to Godfrey, ignoring Dolly's howls of pain. Cyril helped Juliet get Godfrey to the sofa, although he kept saying, "I'm all right, just a little winded. You must attend to Dolly." "She's not dead, Mr. Toby," Cyril said. "Of course she's not," Juliet said. "I just wanted to wing her." Dolly started crawling across the floor on her hands and knees, trailing blood like a snail. Dib was bouncing up and down by her side in a fit of barking that would have woken the dead. I should have shot the bloody dog as well, Juliet thought. "The others will be here soon," Godfrey said to Cyril. Did Cyril interpret this as some kind of order? He reached for the Mauser on the desk and shot Dolly again. "Oh, dear God, Cyril!" Juliet cried. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, he did, Miss Armstrong," Godfrey said. He sighed deeply and tipped his head back wearily on the sofa. "She's still not dead," Cyril said, all the colour gone from his skin. Somehow she kept moving, although now she was dragging herself in circles, mewling like a sick cat. It was like dealing with Rasputin, not a middle-aged woman from Wolverhampton. Godfrey, still rather unsteady on his feet, bent down and picked up his walking stick, releasing some kind of catch that allowed him to withdraw the sword stick that had been hiding quietly inside its walnut casing all this time. And then he pierced Dolly through the heart with it. After they had ascertained that Dolly was dead, Godfrey said, "We must carry on as normal, Miss Armstrong." Dolly's dog had gone into a frenzy of snarling and snapping. Godfrey carried him to the bathroom, where he paused at the door and said to them, "Don't come in here." There was a good deal of squealing and splashing behind the closed door, and then Godfrey emerged with something wrapped in a towel. Later, they found Lily cringing and cowering beneath Perry's bed. It was several days before she entirely trusted them again. They shifted the desks to free the rug that sat in the middle of the room, and lifted Dolly and her faithful companion onto it. "Rather heavier than she looks, I'm afraid," Godfrey said. "Double wrapped," Cyril said as Dolly was rolled in the rug. "Now what, Mr. Toby?" "Trude's coal hole, perhaps?" Godfrey suggested. "Wrong time of year," Juliet replied. "Why don't we just give her a funeral and bury her in a cemetery?" Hartley's department was phoned. "Mr. Gibbons requires a car, please," Juliet said. "Pick-up is at Dolphin Square." The rug-bound Dolly was propped up in the front seat of the car. It was the only way that she would fit. "Ladbroke Grove," Juliet said. Godfrey had made a phone call to someone. Juliet didn't know who and wondered if it was the man with the Astrakhan collar. 2 men in siren suits were waiting for them when they arrived at the undertaker's parlour in Ladbroke Grove. Juliet did not want to see poor Beatrice's coffin being opened, or Dolly's body being placed inside, but she remained, nonetheless, mutely observant. Dib was placed in last, and Godfrey said, "One is reminded of Egyptian pharaohs, mummified cats and so on." They watched until the lid was placed on the coffin. The funeral was to take place the following morning. MI5 had paid for Beatrice's funeral. The only people in attendance were Juliet and, somewhat to her horror, the tall detective.
"Miss Armstrong," he said, tipping his hat, "you do get about for someone who's dead. I'm surprised to see you here."
I felt an odd connection. You know, the way that we were confused with each other.
"I see our girl has a name now."
Yes, Ivy. Ivy Wilson.
"Identified by her sister, I believe. And yet her sister's not here. That's odd, don't you think?"
Yes, perhaps.
"Difficult to be in two places at once, I suppose," he said.
What did he mean by that? Juliet gave him a sharp look, but he was gazing guilelessly at the sky. She was back in Dolphin Square just before lunchtime.
"Miss Armstrong."
Oliver Alleyne was slouched against the doorframe, self-consciously louche.
"Did I startle you?"
Not at all, sir.
He had, horribly.
"No problems?"
No, sir. None.
She could see a flick of blood on the skirting board behind him.
"And yet a messenger boy handed me a note saying you had something you wanted to discuss with me."
Oh, good Lord, Juliet thought. She had forgotten about the note, forgotten that she had planned to expose Godfrey's trysts with the man in the Astrakhan collar. She wasn't about to do so now. They were too complicit in horror, mired in gore, to ever betray each other for lesser sins.
"Tea, sir," she said.
"Tea?"
"Tea. The quality of the tea we're being given is shocking."
"I might remind you that there's a war on, Miss Armstrong."
"Sorry, sir. What about our troops?"
"We're still making a tremendous effort to get them out of France."
"And Nellie Varga, sir?"
"Who?"
"Lily's owner."
"The dog," she said, indicating Lily beneath her desk. He looked at the dog blankly for a second.
"Oh, that. No, nothing."
It had been very important, and now it wasn't. But that was war, Juliet supposed. Alleyne glanced around the room and said,
"Is there something missing? Didn't there used to be a rug here?"
"Yes, sir. It's gone to be cleaned. I spilt ink on it."
"Well, I must be off. I hear you were at a funeral this morning."
"Yes, Beatrice Dodds, Mrs. Scaife's maid. She was buried under a false name, Ivy Wilson. I pretended to be her sister. I don't suppose anyone's been apprehended for her murder, sir?"
"No, and I doubt they ever will. It was a small part of something much larger. We are at war."
"Yes, sir, you said that."
"Well," Alleyne said, "keep me informed."
"About?"
"Everything, Miss Armstrong. Everything."
"Has something happened to Perry?" Juliet asked Hartley. "I haven't seen him for days. Special Branch were looking for him. You've got friends in Special Branch, haven't you?"
"I've got friends everywhere," he said glumly. "You don't know, do you? No, of course you don't. You're very naive about some things. He was arrested for cottaging."
"Cottaging? What on earth was that?"
"Importuning men for immoral purposes, that's the charge. Going into public lavatories and, you know."
"Do I have to spell it out?"
He did.
Hartley said,
"He's in disgrace with the powers that be, although, of course, half of them are inverts or deviants one way or another. I personally don't give a fig about who does what to whom, and everyone knew."
"Everyone but me."
Nominally, Oliver Alleyne became Godfrey's case officer, but they rarely saw him, and they continued to work without any real oversight. Alleyne had lost interest in the fifth column, and in Godfrey's doings too. He had bigger fish to fry. 2 weeks after Dunkirk, Alleyne sent a messenger boy with a note. Nellie Varga had managed to board one of the ships that was evacuating the troops and a number of civilians left behind further south. Nellie had died along with thousands of others, when the Lancastria was attacked off Saint-Nazaire. "So the damned dog is yours," he wrote. The horror was not over. It was all yet to come. Time passes quickly during a war. On the heels of Dunkirk, the Battle of Britain took place above the summer fields, and within weeks the Blitz had begun. Survival trumped memory. There was a greater slaughter than Dolly's to deal with. The Dolphin Square operation had been wound up. Godfrey was moved to Paris to interview captured German officers. Someone said he was at Nuremberg. After that, he seemed to disappear. Juliet herself was reassigned. Miles Merton claimed her for his secretary, and she worked for him for the rest of the war. And then, like so many others, she was summarily dismissed from the service. She found refuge in the BBC. Lily ran away during the Blitz, terrified by the noise. And that was that, Juliet's war. The tall detective had turned up at her door one evening. "Miss Armstrong," he said, "I thought you might like to have a drink." He had a name, too. Harry, a good patriotic name. "Cry God for Harry, England, and St. George," she said, and he laughed and said, "Once more into the breach, Miss Armstrong?" And she thought, "Thank goodness, he has some Shakespeare." Then he pulled her into his strong detective arms. He demystified the sex act, giving her a thoroughly English translation of the éducation sexuelle. It turned out that it was indeed a pursuit like hockey or the piano, and that if you practiced enough, you could become surprisingly proficient. "1950. Juliet walked to the National Gallery and ate her lunchtime sandwich, sitting on the steps. The gallery's steps provided a good vantage point for keeping a weather eye out for mad Hungarians. She folded up her newspaper, fed her crusts to the Trafalgar Square pigeons, and went inside the building. The night watch. There was a seat in front of the painting. "Tenebrism," Merton said, sitting down next to her and gazing at the painting. "Dark and light. You can't have one without the other." Juliet placed her copy of the Times between them on the seat. She preferred to have some space between herself and Merton nowadays. She took the note out of her handbag and passed it to him. "You will pay for what you did." He frowned. "I'm being followed. Nellie Varga." "God, I remember her. One of our first double agents. Insane woman. She made such a fuss over her dog." "I was told she went down on the Lancastria." "Yes, we thought she had. But it was chaos in Saint-Nazaire. Utter chaos. No proper ship's manifest, obviously. She made her way back here sometime after the war." "She wants to kill me." "Any reason in particular?" "The dog died on my watch." "But that's ancient history, surely," Merton said.
"Not to Nellie Varga."
She sighed.
"Sometimes, you know, I think my soul has been confiscated."
"Oh, Juliet," Merton laughed. "Are you grappling with your conscience?"
"Every day."
She stared bleakly at the painting before rousing herself and saying,
"I should get back."
"Yes," Merton said. "I'll be in touch."
"No," she muttered. "You said if I did this one last thing, I would be free of it all."
"Oh, my dear Juliet," he laughed. "One is never free." Juliet left the Times on the seat when she departed. After a few minutes, Miles Merton picked up the newspaper and walked away. In a moment of heightened madness last night, she had thought that it was Dolly who was stalking her, but she had rapidly come to her senses.
"Who are you?"
she asked the shadowy figure sitting in the dark of her flat. She held the Mauser steady.
"I'm quite prepared to shoot you, you know."
And then, as if turned on by an unseen hand, the electricity came magically back to life, and Juliet could see who her uninvited visitor was.
"You?"
she puzzled. "We've had our eye on you for a long time," the man in the astrakhan collared coat said, sitting at the table with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. He poured her a whiskey and said, "Do sit down, Miss Armstrong."
"Do you have a name?"
Juliet asked. He laughed.
"Any name will do," Juliet said. "A name is just a point of reference. Mr. Green ate his dinner. Miss White liked the hat."
He relented. "My name is Mr. Fisher." "I thought you would like to know," Fisher said, "that the Flamingo turned up in Halifax, Nova Scotia. The Americans had him. He's tucked away in Los Alamos now. They obviously didn't trust us to hand him over intact."
"It was nothing to do with me," Juliet said.
"Apparently, our friend the Czech, as well as what was in his head, brought out some valuable documents. Originals, apparently. We believe, however, that someone made copies after he landed in England."
"Copies?"
"On microfilm. I imagine a scenario where the poor man is exhausted after his journey to our shores, in an MI5 safe house, a warm fire, something to eat. And then, when he's fast asleep, someone, Mr. Green or Miss White, a name is just a reference, took the papers from his suitcase, perhaps someone who had once been taught how to pick locks, and then photographed them. What do you think? Plausible? And then Miss White, I imagine it to be a woman somehow, intended to pass this microfilm to her masters so that all that valuable information would not, after all, be lost to them. I suppose that you photographed what was in the Czech suitcase because you think that the Soviets should be our friends, that we would not have won the war without them, and why should they now be denied the same scientific know-how as us? Fuchs's argument, is it not? Tell me, Miss Armstrong, the purges, the show trials, the forced labour camps, they don't worry you? Somehow I can't see you working in a rural cooperative or a factory."
"I don't want to live in Russia."
"That's your problem, you see. You and Merton. You're intellectual communists, but you don't actually want to live beneath its iron thumb."
"It's called idealism, I suppose."
"No, it's called betrayal, Miss Armstrong, and I expect it's exactly the same argument that Godfrey's informants used. How tediously naive you are."
"As it so happens, I don't believe any more."
"Merton's been your handler a long time, hasn't he? I wonder how much loyalty you carry for him."
"Surprisingly little."
The die had been cast long ago. Merton already had an introduction to her when she turned up for her interview with him at the beginning of the war. Her head mistress, an unlikely scout, had recommended her to him. Juliet had been easy to recruit. She had believed in fairness and equality, in justice and truth. She believed that England could be a better country. She had walked away from him at the end of the war, but he had reclaimed her, as had MI5, of course. Just the occasional safe house, Miss Armstrong. One more job, Merton said, that was all, and she would be free of him, of the Soviets. And, like an utter fool, she had believed him. Fisher drained his glass of whiskey. "Do you wish you had shot me when you had the chance just now? Like you did Dolly Roberts?" Was there anything he didn't know?
Godfrey got himself into quite a pickle over that, he laughed. He was strangely fond of you, protective even. A lot of people were. I suppose that was how you got away with it. Alain, of course. He trailed off.
Alain was suspicious of Godfrey, Juliet said. He asked me to report back to him. I followed him and I saw you both at the Brompton Oratory.
Yes, you were rather obvious. You had a dog, I seem to remember.
Ah, he said, as if a missing piece of a puzzle had finally been found. That was Nellie Varga's dog. Why was Alain suspicious of you?
I rather think that question should be turned on its head, don't you? Who spies on the spies, Miss Armstrong?
You. You were suspicious of Alain.
I'm suspicious of everyone, Miss Armstrong. It's my job.
But what of Godfrey? She persisted.
We recalled him to these shores for a mole hunt. We suspected that the flamingo might flush one out of its tunnel, if you'll excuse the contorted image, and we were right, weren't we? You are our little mole, Miss Armstrong. Our blind little mole.
She had an arrangement with Fisher. She would not be arrested and tried for treason if she would hand false information to Merton. The copy of the Times that she was to leave for Merton in the National Gallery would have the microfilm concealed within its pages as previously arranged between them, but the film would not be of the documents she had taken from the Czech's battered suitcase and photographed as he slept on her sofa. Instead, it would contain false information.
You're my girl now, Miss Armstrong. Don't forget it.
But Juliet had an escape plan. Now she was lying in wait in the tea room at Victoria, from where she intended to take the night train to the Gare du Nord. There were two of them, burly types in ill-fitting suits advancing purposefully towards her along the platform. At the same time, Juliet's saviour appeared out of nowhere and ambushed them. Nellie Varga. Varga raining blows on Juliet and her guard dogs indiscriminately. The men were momentarily confounded by the barrage from a small, deranged woman yelling in an impenetrable language. As they grappled with Nellie, Juliet seized her chance. She ran. She had got as far as Vauxhall Bridge when a car roared up and slammed its brakes on beside her. The passenger side door opened and Perry said, "Get in."
"I couldn't let them get you," he said. "They're wolves."
A passage was arranged and paid for, on a trawler. The men agreed to take her across to Holland at dawn.
"I expect that would be a good place to hawk those diamond earrings," Perry said.
I assumed I had so many secrets, Juliet thought, and yet everyone seems to have known them. Will you get into trouble if they find out you helped me?
They won't find out.
Whose side are you on, Perry?
Yours, Miss Armstrong. You're my girl, after all.
It was a nice lie. He always had such good manners. She expected it wasn't a matter of sides at all. It was probably much more complicated than that. She would be away for 30 years. She would be happy, but not excessively so. She would be living in Ravello when they came for her. A knock on the door one day, and 2 grey men standing on her doorstep.
"Miss Armstrong, we've come to take you home."
They needed her testament to bring down Merton and to close the book on things. He was a knight of the realm, an establishment figure, but finally the rumours grew too strong to be ignored. He had flown high, he had fallen. It was the only plot. The trawler sailed from the port into a smoky, misty kind of dawn that contained a promise of good weather later. Humber, Thames, northerly, backing southwesterly 4 to 5 later, fair to good. This England, is it worth fighting for? Yes, she thought. What other answer was there, really?
The trawler approached the mouth of the harbour, preparing to abandon its sheltering arms, and there, standing on one of them, appearing slowly out of the morning mist, was the unmistakable figure of Godfrey Toby. Godfrey raised his hat to her. She raised her hand in silent reply. He lifted his cane in acknowledgment. Prospero's staff, Juliet thought. Godfrey the Magus, the master of ceremonies. As if at a sign, the mist closed around him once more, and he disappeared.
Transcription by Kate Atkinson was read by Fenella Woolgar. It was abridged by Robin Brooks and produced by Ailey McCready.